We're counting down the 25 best games you can play on Nintendo's new hybrid right now, from underrated gems all the way to the absolute system sellers. Story, gameplay, and how they actually run on the hardware. Let's get into it. Monster Hunter Stories 3: Twisted Reflection. You play as a rider tied to twin Rathalos born during a war between two kingdoms, Azuria and Vermeil, and the story actually gets surprisingly heavy, dealing with grief and the cost of conflict between nations who are both kind of right and kind of wrong. Gameplay-wise, it's turn-based with a rock, paper, scissors system using power, speed, and technical attacks, and you're managing a roster of monsties you hatch from eggs and bring into battle alongside a partner character. The exploration and collecting loop is the real hook here, way more than the combat, which can feel a bit passive since you mostly watch fights play out rather than directly controlling them. On Switch 2, it runs at an uncapped frame rate, hovering in the 30 to 40 frames per second range, dipping a bit during exploration but holding up better in combat. Mario Kart World. Instead of picking individual tracks, the whole game world is connected into one giant open map. You can just drive around in free roam, finding shortcuts, P-switch challenges, and hidden Peach medallions. Grand Prix now has you actually racing the roads between tracks, instead of just loading screens. And Knockout Tour is the new mode that's basically Mario Kart meets a battle royale. 24 racers, and every checkpoint eliminates whoever's lagging behind. It's genuinely one of the most tense things in the franchise's history. On the technical side, it runs at 1440p 60 frames per second docked, and 1080p 60 frames per second handheld. And 4-player split screen drops to 30 frames per second per screen, but stays smooth. Free roam can feel a little empty solo, but throw friends into it online with game chat running, and it becomes something else entirely. Octopath Traveler 0. You create your own silent protagonist instead of picking from 8 heroes, which solves a lot of the pacing issues the older games had. And you slowly recruit over 30 characters into an 8-person party as you chase down the people who burned your hometown to the ground. The story arcs against 3 genuinely nasty villains are some of the best writing Square's put into this format. Mechanically, it adds a whole town builder feature where you reconstruct your home village, plus a new path action and job system that lets your hero swap classes while everyone else sticks to a single, deeply specialized role. On Switch 2, it targets 1080p at 60 frames per second in both docked and handheld, with a bigger 400 building cap in the town builder compared to the original Switch's 250. Though there are some frame pacing hiccups during busy town scenes and combat that haven't fully been ironed out yet.
Now or never. I summon thee, Elfric!
Dynasty Warriors Origins. Koei Tecmo's Musou reboot finally lands on Switch 2 about a year after it released elsewhere, and it was worth the wait. You play as a silent, mysterious warrior named Ziluan, who gets to choose which historical commander to support during the Three Kingdoms era, and the storytelling is genuinely some of the best the series has ever done, turning a dense slice of Chinese history into characters you actually care about. Gameplay is classic 1 vs 1000 hack-and-slash carnage, but Origins adds real parry and dodge mechanics that give the combat way more depth than older entries. Plus, every weapon type feels distinct and fun to use. On Switch 2, you get 2 performance options: a locked 30 frames per second mode that's rock steady, or a variable frame rate mode that swings into the 40s and 50s, but isn't quite as consistent. Pragmata. You control Hugh, a stranded astronaut, and Diana, a mysterious android who saves his life on an abandoned lunar research station, overrun by rogue AI-controlled robots. The story leans more on Hugh and Diana's bond than big twists, which works because their growing relationship is genuinely the heart of the game. Combat is where this really shines. It's a hack-and-shoot system where Diana hacks into a robot's defenses through a quick puzzle minigame to expose its weak points, while Hugh handles the actual shooting with a jetpack for dodging and traversal. It's a clever dual-control combat loop unlike anything else out there. On Switch 2, it sacrifices some visual fidelity for performance, but runs smoothly throughout, with phenomenal boss fights and set pieces that hold up even with the downgrade. If you want something that feels genuinely fresh, this is it. The Adventures of Elliot, the Millennium Tales. From the team behind Octopath Traveler and Bravely Default, this is Square Enix's first ever action combat game using the HD 2D art style, and it actually nails it. You play Elliot, an orphan adventurer who discovers a doorway of time and ends up traveling across 4 different ages of history alongside a fairy companion named Faye, trying to save his kingdom from a creeping curse. It plays like a love letter to top-down Zelda, specifically Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, with real-time combat using 7 different weapon types you can swap between mid-fight, plus a magicite system that lets you customize each weapon with extra effects. The shrine-like puzzle dungeons and open exploration give it serious Breath of the Wild energy in miniature. Atlus's full remake of Persona 3 finally hit Switch 2, and it's still one of the best JRPGs of the last few years. You're a transfer student at Gekkoukan High who gets pulled into the Dark Hour, a hidden 25th hour where the world freezes and monstrous shadows roam a massive tower called Tartarus that you have to climb. It blends real-life, social link-style relationships during the day with dungeon-crawling, turn-based combat at night, all wrapped in one of gaming's most stylish presentations. Combat uses the classic Persona system of exploiting enemy weaknesses for extra turns, and the social sim half genuinely deepens your party's actual combat abilities, so it's never just filler. At launch, the Switch 2 version was locked to 30 frames per second and got some criticism for stutter, but Atlus pushed a major patch in December 2025 that added a 60 frames per second performance mode docked, and it's a noticeably smoother experience now.
We could head back, but it's...
Dragon Quest VII Reimagined. You're a fisherman's son on the small island of Astard, who discovers ancient stone fragments that let your group time travel to the past. And your actions back then start reshaping the present, island by island, as you literally rebuild the world piece by piece. It's a much more streamlined version of the original than the 3DS remake was, trimming a lot of the slower pacing while keeping the time travel mystery intact. The job system returns, letting you mix and match vocations like mage and warrior on the fly with a special device, which makes party building genuinely flexible. Runs at a smooth, steady 60 frames per second with quick load times in both docked and handheld. A clear step up from the 30 frames per second Switch 1 version. Some diehard fans wish a few classic systems, like death penalties, weren't softened so much. But if you've never played this one, it's a gorgeous, much more approachable way to experience a true Dragon Quest classic. Final Fantasy Tactics: The Ivalice Chronicles. You play as Ramza Bulv, a young noble caught in the middle of the War of the Lions, a brutal political conflict where his childhood friend Delita rises through the ranks with ruthless ambition, while Ramza tries to do what's right. It's one of the most politically dense, mature stories in the entire Final Fantasy franchise, and now it's fully voice-acted for the first time, which adds a ton of weight to scenes that used to just be text boxes. The grid-based tactical combat is as good as it's ever been, with a deep job system letting you mix primary and secondary classes, reaction abilities, and movement skills to build out a genuinely versatile squad. On Switch 2, it runs at 1080p docked and 720p handheld, both locked at 60 frames per second, and it's smooth in both modes despite some softness in the visuals when docked.
This fleeting life, cling to it not. Embrace inevitable end. Judgment!
Devil May Cry 5 Devil Hunter Edition. 3 playable demon hunters, Nero, V, and the legendary Dante, team up to take down a new demon threat called Urizen that's grown a massive tree in the middle of Red Grave City. And along the way, Dante's twin brother Virgil makes his big comeback too. The story is better than people give it credit for, with real emotional stakes hiding under all the stylish chaos. Gameplay-wise, this is still some of the best character action combat ever made. Dante alone juggles 4 melee weapons, 4 ranged weapons, and 4 different combat styles you switch between on the fly. While Nero's got his breakable Devil Breaker arms, and Virgil plays like an entirely different game, built around speed and precision. On Switch 2, it locks to a rock-solid 60 frames per second in both docked and handheld, and some testers have even clocked it running well above that. Star Fox. You're flying as a young, inexperienced Fox McCloud, commanding his late father's old mercenary team against the evil Andross. And this version expands every mission briefing into a full animated cutscene, giving real arcs to characters who used to just have a couple one-liners. The core gameplay is still that beloved rail shooter formula, blasting through branching paths in your R-Wing with barrel rolls and bombs. Plus, the Landmaster tank and Blue Marine subsections feel more distinct than ever before. The genuinely new addition is Mouse Mode, which shifts you into first person and lets you aim the whole aircraft with Joy-Con 2 in a way that actually feels great. It's a short campaign. You can clear a single run in about an hour, but the branching paths and true ending push you to replay it again and again. Trails in the Sky, First Chapter. You play as Estelle and Joshua, 2 siblings training to become bracers, freelance guardians of the land of Liberl. And what starts as a simple coming-of-age adventure slowly unravels into something much bigger, involving conspiracies and ancient technology. The big new mechanical twist is that battles let you freely swap between real-time action combat and the classic turn-based system mid-fight, so you can play it fast and arcadey or slow down and think tactically whenever you want. On Switch 2, the upgrade pack costs just $1 over the regular Switch version and brings noticeably better visuals, resolution, and load times, though performance hasn't been perfectly locked at its 60 frames per second target yet, with some hitching during cutscenes and in towns. Even with that wrinkle, this is widely considered one of the best JRPG remakes in years, and a genuinely great way to finally start the Trails series.
Here we go!
Rise of the Tomb Raider, 20-year celebration. About a year after the disaster on Yamatai, Lara's chasing her late father's research into the Divine Source, an ancient artifact rumored to grant immortality, which takes her deep into the snowy mountains of Siberia, while a shady organization called Trinity hunts the same secret. The gameplay builds heavily on the 2013 reboot, with bigger, more elaborate tombs and puzzles, satisfying traversal with ice axes and rope arrows, and Metroidvania-style backtracking once you unlock new tools. This version bundles in literally every piece of DLC ever released, including the horror-themed Lara's Nightmare mode and the survival-focused Endurance mode. On Switch 2, it runs at a steady, locked 1080p 30 frames per second in both docked and handheld. And while it's not quite as flashy as the original PS4 Pro's 60 frames per second option, it's smooth and reliable throughout. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Easily one of the most impressive third-party ports the Switch 2 has gotten, and it's wild that this even runs on a handheld at all. Set between Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade, you play Indy investigating a stolen mummy and a fascist plot tied to ancient sites connected across the globe by something called the Great Circle, taking you from the Vatican to the jungles of Thailand. Gameplay mixes first-person melee combat, where you can clock Nazis with literally anything you can pick up, light gunplay, stealth, and genuinely clever environmental puzzles, all wrapped in cinematic presentation that rivals the actual movies, thanks to Troy Baker's career-defining performance as Indy. On Switch 2, it runs at a locked 30 frames per second, with 1080p resolution docked and 720p handheld using DLSS to clean up the image, and performance stays remarkably stable throughout, with only minor texture pop-in here and there.
You should know by now. I am always in control.
Hollow Knight Silksong. You take control of Hornet, exploring the brand new kingdom of Farloom with faster traversal, needle-based combat, and the same dense, atmospheric Metroidvania design that made the original a classic. Except everything here is bigger, tighter, and noticeably harder. The combat loop revolves around precise needle strikes, silk-based aerial movement, and a deep collection of tools and charms that completely change how you approach exploration and boss fights. On Switch 2, this thing flies, hitting 1080p at 120 frames per second in handheld mode by default, with a 4K 60 frames per second or 1080p 120 frames per second option when docked. A massive leap over the original Switch's 720p 60 frames per second cap. That extra frame rate genuinely matters here too, since parrying and aerial maneuvers feel noticeably more responsive with the lower input lag. Capcom delivering a brand new flagship Resident Evil game day and date with PS5 and Xbox on Switch 2 still feels unbelievable, but here we are, and it's genuinely great. You split your time between Grace Ashcroft, an introverted FBI analyst investigating a string of murders, and a returning, battle-worn Leon Kennedy, both of whom get tangled up with Umbrella Corporation secrets and a terrifying new antagonist named Victor Gideon. The first half mostly belongs to Grace and plays as classic methodical survival horror, scarce ammo, first-person tension, the works, while Leon's sections in the back half shift toward the faster, more action-heavy combat the series leaned into with RE4. It's a genuinely effective blend of both eras of Resident Evil. On Switch 2, it targets 1080p with DLSS upscaling and tries for 60 frames per second, mostly succeeding with only occasional dips and a few minor visual hiccups, while docked play bumps things up to 4K.
Think I want a second opinion.
Hades 2. You're Millennium, a witch princess of the underworld, on a mission to take down the Titan of Time, Kronos, who's overthrown your family and frozen the world in his grip, fighting your way back up through ever-changing procedurally generated zones each run. The core roguelike loop is still there. Fight through rooms, collect boon blessings from different gods, die, and come back stronger with permanent upgrades. But Millennium's moveset and the new dual-cast magic system genuinely change how you have to approach combat compared to the first game. It plays differently enough that veterans of the original Hades will need to relearn their habits. On Switch 2, it's basically flawless technically, locked 60 frames per second in handheld and an even smoother 120 frames per second when docked, with 0 frame pacing issues reported in either mode. Blueprints. You inherit a mysterious 45-room manor from your great-uncle, and to claim it for real, you have to find the impossible 46th room. Except, the entire mansion's layout shuffles every single day, forcing you to draft new rooms strategically as you explore. It's part roguelike, part first-person puzzle box, and the deeper mysteries hidden in the house go way beyond just finding that one room. Expect to fill an actual notebook with notes if you want to crack everything. The drafting system means every door you open is a real gamble, balancing your limited stamina against which rooms might unlock keys, resources, or critical clues for the dozens of interconnected puzzles scattered throughout. On Switch 2, it runs at a stable 30 frames per second in both docked and handheld, though load times run a bit longer than on other platforms, and the resolution is noticeably softer when docked. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Cloud and the gang leave Midgar behind and head out into a sprawling open world, chasing Sephiroth across the planet of Gaia, with dense regions packed full of side quests, world activities, and minigames, including the now legendary card game Queen's Blood, that somehow never feel like padding. Combat builds directly on Remake's real-time action and materia system, but adds even more depth with synergy abilities between party members, letting you pull off some genuinely flashy combo attacks. Getting this game onto Switch 2 at all is a technical miracle, given how demanding it is even on PC. It's locked at 30 frames per second, with no separate performance or quality modes, just one single preset using DLSS upscaling. And while there are noticeable frame drops in busier open-world areas, and the image can look soft, the core experience holds together remarkably well in both docked and handheld play. Dragon Quest I and II HD 2D Remake. Dragon Quest I puts you in the shoes of a lone hero descended from the legendary Erdrick, setting out solo to defeat the Dragon Lord and save the kingdom of Alefgard. While Dragon Quest II expands things into a full party adventure with new named characters and a brand new underwater kingdom that wasn't in the original at all. Quality of life additions like optional quest markers, multi-enemy battles for the first game, and new skills make these classic, sometimes punishingly old-school RPGs way more approachable for modern players, while purists can turn most of that off if they want the authentic grind. On Switch 2, you get two modes, a crisp 30 frames per second visual mode or a softer-looking 60 frames per second performance mode, both docked and handheld, which is a real step up from the Switch 1 version that's locked to 30 frames per second with no options at all. Pokémon Pokopia. You play as Ditto, who's lost its trainer and wakes up in an abandoned, ruined version of the Kanto region with no humans anywhere in sight, slowly rebuilding the world, block by block, befriending Pokémon and piecing together what actually happened to everyone. The core loop has you crafting habitats out of destructible, Minecraft-style terrain to attract specific Pokémon, then customizing those homes to keep them happy, all while uncovering surprisingly melancholic lore through old newspapers and journals scattered around the world. It plays like a mashup of Dragon Quest Builders, Animal Crossing, and Story of Seasons, and the writing has a genuinely dark, post-apocalyptic edge hiding under its cute exterior. The story mode runs at a smooth 60 frames per second in both docked and handheld, with only the occasional minor dip during the most building-heavy, free construction zones. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. This covers the opening act of the original 1997 classic, expanded into a 40-plus hour story set entirely within the city of Midgar, following Cloud Strife as he joins the eco-terrorist group Avalanche to fight back against the Shinra Corporation's reactors, draining the planet dry. It includes the full Intergrade upgrade with Yuffie's episode intermission DLC, bundled in from the start. Combat blends real-time action with strategic ability and materia management, letting you pause to plan attacks while still feeling fast and kinetic in the moment. On Switch 2, it's locked at 30 frames per second, but is rock solid throughout, with barely any frame pacing issues reported across docked or handheld play. And even though textures and resolution take a hit compared to PS5, the lighting and overall presentation still look genuinely stunning.
Junk is a heavy weapons platform. If we rush in, we die.
Is that right?
Need to hit it with magic.
Mina the Hollower. You play Mina, an inventor and member of the Hollowers Guild, sent to investigate why the spark generators powering Tenebrous Isle are failing, which sends you digging through 6 distinct, monster-infested regions to restore power and uncover what's really going on. The signature mechanic is hollowing, letting Mina burrow underground to dodge attacks, cross obstacles, and launch herself into the air, and it's woven into nearly every puzzle, platforming section, and combat encounter in a way that feels genuinely inventive. There's a massive arsenal of main weapons, sidearms, and trinkets to mix and match too, giving the combat real build variety. On Switch 2, it absolutely flies, locked at a smooth 120 frames per second in both docked and handheld with practically instant loading. Donkey Kong Bananza. After the evil Voidco Corporation steals every Banandium gem from his mine, DK gets knocked deep underground and teams up with a mysterious girl named Pauline to dig his way to the planet's core, where legend says there's a power that can grant any wish. The whole game is built around full destructible voxel terrain, meaning you can punch, smash, and tunnel through almost everything in the environment, and it genuinely changes how you explore and solve puzzles compared to something like Mario Odyssey. Bananza transformations you unlock along the way, like a super strength gorilla form or a gliding form, add even more variety to traversal and combat. It mostly holds a smooth 60 frames per second, and the developers have openly said the voxel destruction tech simply wasn't viable at 30 frames per second on the original Switch, which is part of why this became a Switch 2 exclusive. Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition bundles in the full Phantom Liberty expansion, a tense spy thriller storyline featuring Idris Elba that's widely considered some of the best content CD Projekt Red has ever made. Gameplay is a deep, first-person action RPG where you build out your character through skill trees, cybernetic implants, and a genuinely huge variety of playstyles. Whether you want to go in guns blazing, hack everything from a distance, or sneak through entirely. On Switch 2, you get a choice between a 30 frames per second quality mode and a roughly 40 frames per second performance mode, both running around 1080p docked using DLSS upscaling. And while resolution drops noticeably in handheld, and dense crowds thin out a bit for performance, the whole experience remains stable, content complete, and seriously impressive for what it's running on. And that's the list. 25 games proving Switch 2's library is already stacked. Let me know your picks in the comments, smash that like button, and I'll catch you in the next one.